Barakata Yahweh, Barakata Yahushai, Ba'ashem, Rekah HaKodash, Barakata. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahushai. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone that rule well, and peace and salutations to Yakim out there pushing this word in truth. This is the Brother Ride with another video, and I have a few articles that I'll be reading from. And as we'll come to see with each passing day, we're getting closer and closer to getting out of this captivity, and also closer and closer to the destruction of America, Mystery Babylon. In the first article, Slaki. In the first article I'll be reading from is from CNBC.com, and the title reads, Saudi Arabia and Russia's unparalleled oil deal gets backing from OPEC. Riyadh and Moscow have been engaged in supply cuts over the past year in order to try to clear a global supply overhang and keep prices in check. Yet, in an effort to further their influence over world crude supplies, the two countries are now reportedly working on a deal to actively manage markets for potentially the next 20 years. At the start of the week, Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman told Reuters, "We are working to shift from a year-to-year agreement to a 20-year agreement." And this is pretty significant that Saudi Arabia and Russia are making a deal like this. It seems similar to the deal Saudi Arabia and the U.S. made back in the 70s for Saudi Arabia to sell its oil in U.S. dollars in return for U.S. Military hardware and U.S. military protection. But with each passing day, America's allies are losing their confidence in the U.S., so they're turning to the U.S.'s enemies because they're afraid of not only ending up on a regime change hit list of the U.S., but also the U.S. is trying to cut into their business deals, and obviously they wouldn't want that, which we'll see a little bit later. Saudi Arabia and Russia are ironing out the details on an unprecedented pact to extend controls over major exporters for decades to come. Riyadh and Moscow have been engaged in supply cuts over the past year in order to try and clear a global supply overhang and keep prices in check. Yet, in an effort to further their influence over the world crude supplies, the two countries are now reportedly working on a deal to actively manage markets for potentially the next 20 years. OPEC is working on a very long-term deal to try to extend its alliance with other oil producers, Secretary General Mohammed Barkindo said at an energy conference in Baghdad, Iraq on Wednesday. Barkindo's comments followed news at the start of the week in which Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman told Reuters, "We are working to shift from a year-to-year agreement to a 10 to 20-year agreement. OPEC would like pact with Russia very much. OPEC and Russia were thought to be turning their production cutting deal into a longer-term relationship in a bid to help fend off the next downturn and make the oil market less volatile. However, a 10 to 20-year pact would be an unprecedented move." I think it's certainly something that OPEC would like very much, and I think the agreement that they struck, that is, with OPEC and non-OPEC members, actually took them quite a large step towards that, Colin Smith, oil analyst at Panmure Gordon, told CNBC Wednesday. "I think getting to a fully fledged agreement in which Russia becomes a de facto member is a bit of a push at the moment," he added, and that's just a typical American Edomite trying to save face. With a 10 to 20 year agreement, who knows what can happen. It seems like they're in pretty good terms with each other. The current agreement between OPEC and allied non-OPEC producers to reduce oil output by 1.8 million barrels a day is set to extend through the end of the year. No end in sight to Saudi-Russia relationship. Meanwhile, in recent months, multiple energy ministers have endorsed retaining a relationship that could help prevent another destabilizing collapse in oil prices like the one in 2015 and 2016. Prices have since recovered to above $60 per barrel after crashing down to $30 at the start of 2016, and OPEC's Barkindo has since described the agreement, which will be reviewed in June, to be as solid as the Rock of Gibraltar. The deal will then be reviewed again in December. While we wait to see if an unparalleled decades-long agreement between so many producers can be achieved, one thing seems certain: there is no expire date in sight for the Saudi-Russia romance. Stephen Brennick, oil analysts like at PVM Oil Associates, said in an email on Wednesday. Now I'm going to go to my second article, also on CNBC. And this one was published a little earlier from the first article I used, and they made some speculations in this, which we'll see were unfounded because, as we saw in my first article, the Saudis and Russians are planning to make a 10 to 20 year deal. And the title reads, Russia, OPEC married, at least for now, to help avoid another painful downturn. OPEC and other oil producers like Russia are expected to formalize the relationship that led to a production cut. Russia's deputy energy minister says the group has not yet met their goal of stabilizing the market and could in the second half of the year. OPEC's alliance with other energy nations is seen as a necessary step to prevent another deep downturn. OPEC, Russia, and other non-OPEC nations are likely to turn their production-cutting deal into a longer-term relationship to help fend off the next downturn and make the oil market less volatile. The agreement to reduce oil output by 1.8 million barrels a day extends through the end of the year, and multiple ministers endorsed retaining a relationship that could help prevent another destabilizing collapse in oil prices like the one in 2015 and 2016. We realized it was a negative-sum game. All of us producers and consumers were losing when the oil price went down, said Mohammed Saleh Abdullah Al-Sada, Qatar Minister of Energy and Industry. Al-Sada, speaking at IHS Markit's annual CERAWeek conference, was instrumental in bringing fellow OPEC ministers into agreement on a deal in 2016 when they met on the sidelines of an industry conference in Algeria. A year earlier, we opened channels with Russia, and again we found they were thinking alike, he said. We found once we agreed upon ourselves, Russia was very positive. Here's a good point. The thorn in the side of major oil-producing nations has been the U.S. U.S. shale, which started to boom in the last decade as the industry applied and continued to improve new technologies. The message from CERAWeek was that OPEC will continue to hold the market steady for now. That's a major reason that the Saudis and the Russians are making this deal, because with the U.S. coming into the oil market with their shale production, they're cutting into the Saudis' business, and nobody likes to lose money. So it makes sense for the Saudis and the Russians to make a deal. And also, if you remember, the petro yuan launched earlier this week. So what benefit would the Saudi Arabians have of still selling their oil in petrodollars when the U.S. is cutting into their oil productions, when you could switch over to the petro yuan and start selling it in petro yuans? And then if you have other countries switch over to the petro yuan than the dollar, then you just get a boost in making money. So you can see the pieces coming together for America's collapse. OPEC and Russia motivations may ultimately diverge. While OPEC and Russia agreed to cut back, shale drivers are driven purely by economics, and they increase production as prices stabilize. And that's a typical American Edomite thinking, making money regardless of whether it affects your own people or not. Because if you look into a little bit of how that shale is produced, they frack into the ground, and a lot of those fumes from that fracking seep up into the ground, into people's water supplies. And you can go watch videos where some people will turn on their sink and put water in a cup, and they can light that cup on fire because it has that shale gases in it. So it's at the expense of your own people. You're making money. It's madness. Now at record oil production of more than 10 million barrels a day, the United States is ahead of Saudi Arabia since it parted back production. Russia and OPEC have a major problem in the long run. The fact that the Saudis are pegging the US dollar and the Russians have a floating currency means in the long run the Saudis want more dollars and the Russians want more barrels, said Francisco Blanc, head of global commodities and derivatives research at Bank of America Merrill Lynch. It worked out for the last year and a half, and they are investing in others countries, he said recently. At the end of the day, if the Russians extend the deal into 2020, they lose more market share to the U.S., and I don't think they're willing to do that. And 2020 is just in a couple of years, but as we just read with the previous article, the Saudis and Russians are planning to do a 10 to 20 year deal, so they were completely off on this. And what I just said about the petro yuan launching and U.S. shale productions cutting into the Saudis' oil market, soon the Saudis aren't going to care about that U.S. dollar. They're going to probably switch over to the petro yuan. So as you can see, things are just coming together.